Caddis Maximus here again, this time with the review of the Kershaw Swerve Spring-Assisted 3-inch blade pocket knife. This was another impulse buy, but one I am going to keep because it was $17 at the discount store where I went shopping. It is indeed a Chinese-made knife, but it is pretty nice, as it does have the Kershaw name behind it. And then, even though there's definitely arguments about Chinese-made knives, and you can see it says China right there, Kershaw does focus quite a bit on the quality control, so they have a limited lifetime warranty. And from what I've read, it's actually reasonable with Kershaw. Not if you ding up the blade, but if the internal spring breaks, or you just have screws that fall out that just won't stay tight, those type of build quality issues, they will replace the unit. And if it does have a dinged up blade, but it has other issues, maybe the belt clip, keeps on getting loose, you get a whole new knife. Another nice thing about Kershaw is they actually give you some reasonable information on the packaging. It's 7 1/4 inches overall length, 3-inch blade, 4 1/4 inch handle, 4.8 ounces. They call it a deep carry pocket clip because the pocket clip is set pretty far back on the blade, so it's deep down into the pocket. Unlike, say, this Harbor Freight Gorn, which would be more shallow. When you have it in the pocket, you have this whole section of the knife that's sticking out. Liner lock, glass-filled nylon handle, so this would be PA6. They don't tell you the grade factor. It could be, or glass fiber content. It could be 20%. It could be 30, 35%. But that's the same material that power tool bodies are made of. We know power tools can be pretty darn durable. And so that's what the handles, the exterior handles, but it does have steel inserts, and they are quite thick on this knife. And then they have little Kershaw Ks as the texturing. They do advertise 8 CR13 MOV steel, and the model number is 3850X. Now, this is a pretty decent knife. It is a liner lock spring-assisted opening. So when you flip the switch, and we'll just do it normally, it has a spring that helps accelerate it open. And it works pretty well. These tend to take a little bit of time. The other Kershaw, little one that I reviewed, is really smooth. This one has a much stronger spring, and it does need to break in a little bit. Kershaw knives are generally really tight, so they do need a little bit of time to break in, wear in, so they'll move pretty well. This has a really tall blade, almost twice as tall as the smaller Kershaw that I had reviewed. And I'll compare this to another couple of tall blade knives. They call this the Swerve because it does have kind of a bent down handle. I do like the finger flip knives, whether or not that they're spring assisted, just because that finger flip, when we have this closed here, and you always want to be careful closing knives, don't cut yourself, is the finger flip that makes it easy to open. And on this one, of course, it's spring assisted, turns into a nice little spot for your hand to hold. So if you're trying to puncture through some of that bulletproof packaging, you don't have to worry so much about having such a extreme grip, so that you don't risk your hand sliding forward and, of course, cutting your fingers. So I really approve of that, and really look for knives like that. We do have 3 nice retaining screws, as well as the one that holds the blade, so that's 4 screws holding the body of the knife together. The reason that's significant is many knives, even this knife at Sir Harbor Freight, it's only 3 screws that effectively hold the body of the knife, the 2 halves together. So it's nice to see that this has a total of 4, 3 independent ones, and then 1 for the hinge pin. The one thing they don't mention is this is quite bulky. It is a tall blade knife. It has a very thick handle. For somebody who likes a bit thicker knives, and they may like this. It doesn't have any jimping or the serrations for grip. It does have a few on the blade, but they're real light, and none on the body. And I do like a more aggressive jimping on a knife. The one thing that I'll mention, and people may take note of, is not just that it has a deep set belt clip, but the fact that it's held on in a very different fashion. Pretty much all belt clips, such as, this Harbor Freight, they're screwed in the side of the body. The Milwaukee, they're screwed into the side of the body. The Harbor Freight Tactical, which I should mention, see this, lots of deep serrations. I really like that. No knife is perfect. But the same thing on this one, I've actually managed to get those screws to stay tight when I torqued them down to just about the point of them stripping out. But inevitably, those screws get loose, and then the handle falls off. You keep on tightening them, and they eventually do strip out, and there's nothing you can do about it. Kershaw, what they have done, and I thought that was genius, they do have a a big plastic, which I assume is also glass-filled nylon, PA6GF something or another. You know, who knows what the GF would be, glass fiber in percentage, is they screw the screw into that, and so the belt clip actually has a hole in it, goes through the handle. See there, you can just see the tip of the other end there, and then it is cross-bolted. Now this screw that provides a couple of advantages. One, instead of the screw just being held in just a thin cross-section of metal, they now can use a much longer screw. Secondly, it's screwed into nylon, out of all plastics, nylon, which provides quite a bit of friction. So even if the screw does turn a little bit, or maybe you flip it around, you don't tighten it down fully, it's not like a screw in metal where if it isn't torqued, then it's loose and it'll eventually work its way out. Even if this isn't fully torqued, it still has a lot of friction in the nylon. So the screw itself isn't going to want to work itself out. It's going to be much longer, so it has a whole lot more contact area. And then it's a cross-bolted design. And I suspect that this belt clip is not one that's going to work loose on you at all, ever. It is also something I really like. The belt clip is extremely stiff. Some people may even find this to be a little too stiff. It will work in and bend just a little bit as you use the knife. It is a short clip, and so I assume that's kind of why they make it so stiff and a little bit extra thick. But some people don't like that, because if you're always, you know, wearing jeans and you're using a pocket knife quite often, then the stiff belt clips means that you got to kind of pull the pocket to get it into your pocket properly, and then it tends to wear out the corner of the pocket. But it will stay in your pocket pretty well, and you don't have to worry about it just becoming weak and bending out, you know, such as like this Milwaukee, which is really easy to get in and out of your pocket. It's also really easy for you to bend over or crouch down or something like that and have it actually just poke up out of your pocket, and when you stand up it kind of flips out and drops. There's a reason why you really want stronger belt clips, and you just get used to them, because it's a lot more easier to deal with a strong belt clip than it is to constantly be picking up a pocket knife that keeps falling out. The spring assist on this is quite stiff. It isn't just a little fingertip, and it's a pretty heavy blade, so it needs to be pretty stiff. But I kind of like this better. This is more utilitarian, because it actually has quite a bit of spring tension wanting to hold it back in, or hold the blade closed, which is nice. It's less likely to want to pop open. Even if it drops and hits the ground, it's not going to want to really pop open. We can see that the assist is only for about 60 or 70 degrees of motion. Right there's the end of the assist, so when you flip it, it kind of gets it over the hump region and then just accelerates the blade out. And we can tell by that is not quite, or the amount of friction that it has, excuse me, is when you do it vertically, sometimes it doesn't always want to lock into place. You kind of got to give it a good heave if you're doing it vertically, and as it breaks in, it'll work, but it just doesn't quite want to lock in the place when you're in the worst situation, where you're making the spring work again fully against gravity. And it's only in that vertical situation when you give it kind of a lighter flick. If you give it a stiff flick, it tends to work just fine. Oh, that time it didn't work either. There we go. So definitely needs to be broken in. If you're using it in any other position, it just has no issues locking into place at all. You know, sideways, of course, down. It's just when you're making it work against the gravity, against this really tall blade, it just has some issues. You really got to give it some kick. Otherwise, it just doesn't want to quite get far enough to engage the liner lock. Speaking of the liner lock, I'll have to say this is a very stiff liner lock, and some people may not like that. You basically, it's almost impossible to really use your thumb to release it. You really got to get in there with your finger and push it over like that. They use extra thick steel for the liner, so that helps explain why it is so stiff, but it may just be a bit too much for a lot of people to have a liner that is so stiff that you can't push it over with your thumb. You kind of, but you really got to press down, and it doesn't stick up very far. It might have been nice if they made a little bit of an extra protrusion coming off the top of this, so it'd be easier to get with your thumb. Now, if we compare kind of the blade styles, I call these tall blades. So Harbor Freight actually has this Gordon, which I like, just because there's a heavy stainless steel body. As far as a pocket knife at Harbor Freight, this is actually pretty nice. This is just a thumb open. And we can see that it is a similar, kind of a similar style. This is a Smith & Wesson also has some branded ones that look like this. And we can see that the blade it's a similar shape. Basically, they cut off the top versus the Kershaw where they leave the entire top. But it is a extra thick, extra wide blade, which is great for opening packaging, giving you extra rigidity, and it's about the same thickness. And we can see even on the Harbor Freight, this is what I'm talking about. They make the liner lock kind of raised up a little bit, and then they put some knurling or some cuts on there to make it easier to grasp. And it's, kind of surprising how even, great brands, there's just so many aspects, and sometimes they just do things where I think if somebody had mentioned during the design phase, they would have done something similar to that. The other knife that I have that's kind of a little bit smaller but similar would be this Milwaukee Fastback pocket knife. I never thought this one was very great. It was a little bit lightweight, especially for the price that Milwaukee's charging. It's surprising, but for the same price, you can get this Kershaw, or you can get this Milwaukee. And to tell you the truth, the Kershaw's, this Swerve is much better. And this has also a nice thick blade. As we can see, it's about the same thickness, maybe a touch thicker than the Kershaw, and maybe just it has a kind of a similar profile, but just not quite as tall. And so that's just to compare it against a couple other knives that people may have seen. This Milwaukee's odd because it's a push button, it's lock and close, which I do kind of like. So it's a push button to lock it closed, but a liner lock to lock it open. We can also see on the Milwaukee that they put some texturing on the liner lock, so it's not exactly foreign. It would have been nice. That's probably one of the biggest disadvantages or issues with this Kershaw is just the fact that the liner lock is very difficult to deal with, and that it's pretty tight when it's new, and so you really have to flick it kind of hard. And the spring assist, they do put in a strong spring, but it's so much that you just can't use your fingertip. It's almost impossible. You really got to get your whole finger on there to really get it to flip open. And of course, it's bulky, but at the same time, it fits your hand much better. You get a really good purchase on this. It feels like you have a very strong hold, and it's not going to go anywhere regardless of what you're doing, whether you're cutting rope or, cutting up whittling down some kindling or anything like that. So anyway, I just wanted to do my review. I kind of impulse bought this, and there weren't many YouTube reviews of this particular Kershaw, so I figured I'd put my 2 cents in there. Anyway, it's the end of another review from Catus Maximus, and if you haven't subscribed, please do subscribe to the Catus Maximus channel. Until next time, Catus Maximus out.